Good morning, welcome to
Math number 103.
KidMath number 103. So today, actually we're doing our movie before we do our math today. We're just going to talk in our movie about the inverse function for f of x equals x squared. Okay? So if we have an inverse function, f inverse of x, how is that defined?
Well, this means that f of minus 1 of x
Read it as f inverse. F of f inverse of x
equals x.
equals x, okay? And there's one other piece that ends up being exactly the same. What's the other way to define it?
F inverse
of
f of x.
f of x
is also x.
equals x, okay? And so I'm going to show you one thing that's a little tricky sometimes with inverse functions. Okay?
Alright.
So if there was an inverse function to f of x equals x squared, okay, it would have to satisfy, instead of writing f inverse, let me just call it g,
Alright.
just so I can write g. So g of x would have to satisfy g of x squared would have to become x, right? Because that's g of f of x.
Yeah, so maybe it would be the square root of x squared.
Okay, interesting. But the problem is that what's 2 squared?
That's 4.
What's minus 2 squared?
That's also 4.
Okay, so if this was going to be an inverse function, it would have to send g of 2 squared would have to become 2, and g of minus 2 squared would have to become minus 2. But they're both 4, so it would have to figure out, sometimes it has to send 4 to 2, and sometimes it has to send 4 to minus 2. Can functions do that?
No.
No. So we do have a problem. Okay? But your instincts are right on. It looks like the inverse function of this, the inverse function of x squared, should be the square root of x. And let's check and see if that makes sense. If g of x is the square root of x, well, g of x squared is the square root of x squared, which is
x.
Aha. So now we're getting into stuff we haven't quite talked all the way through yet. I've told you this square root function is defined as the positive square root, right? Okay, so if x is positive, like 2 squared, which is 4, it does give me x. What if x is negative?
Then you're going to get complex numbers.
No. Negative 2 squared is?
4.
What's the square root of 4?
2.
2. So if x is positive, you get x. If x is negative, what do you get?
Negative x.
Negative x. And so the square root of x squared, believe it or not, is the absolute value of x. Okay? If x is positive, it stays the same. If x is negative, it
becomes positive.
So that means f of x equals x squared. And what sort of shape is the graph of that?
That's a parabola.
It's a parabola.
It's like our y equals x squared parabola.
That means there's only an inverse function. We have to cut the graph a little bit to make an inverse function. In fact, if we only use the positive side of it, f of x equals x squared for x greater than or equal to 0, just this, the right half of the graph. The right half of the graph. This does have an inverse function, and that inverse function is what?
It's the absolute value of x. It's the square root.
The square root of x.
That.
Okay. Y equals x squared, or f of x equals x squared, and here's y equals the square root of x. Those are inverse functions of each other, but you just have to be careful. You have to make sure that the inverse completely exists. And it does.
Yeah, on the positive side.
On the positive side. Let me check that worked, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. So this gives a hint of some of the stuff we're going to talk about later today when you're back from walking the dog. Okay?
Alright.
Alright. Good job, sweetie. Oh, and by the way, when I'm turning the camera off, what's the point where those meet, where they're equal to each other? Where this x squared equals the square root of x. Looks like there's 2 of them.
Yeah.
Where are those 2 points?
This one looks like it's 0, 0.
Yeah, x equals 0.
And where would this be?
Where does x squared equal the square root of x?
Well, when x is 1.
When x is 1. Alright, good job.